This is the story of a family who seemed to have it all: a warm, loving home, a bright young boy named Tommy, and a loyal German shepherd named Max, who was more than just a pet. Max had been with the family since Tommy was a baby, forming an inseparable bond with the child. Tommy's days were filled with laughter and adventure, much of it shared with Max, whether they were playing fetch in the backyard or simply lying together on the living room floor as Tommy read aloud from his favorite books. Max was gentle, protective, and fiercely devoted, always staying close to Tommy, as though he understood his role as the boy's guardian. Sarah and Mike, Tommy's parents, often joked that Max was their second child, a member of the family who just happened to have 4 legs and a wagging tail. They trusted him completely and never questioned his behavior because Max had always been calm, kind, and predictable. But as the peaceful days unfolded, no one could have imagined that this loyal dog would soon start to act in a way that would leave the family questioning everything they thought they knew. It was late at night when Sarah and Mike were startled awake by an unusual sound. It was a low, steady growl coming from the hallway outside Tommy's bedroom. Max, their usually calm and quiet German shepherd, stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the door to Tommy's room. Sarah sat up, her heart pounding, while Mike groggily got out of bed to see what was wrong. When he approached Max, the dog's growl softened, but his intense focus on the door didn't waver. Mike peeked into Tommy's room to find their son sound asleep, tucked under his blanket. He shook his head and gently patted Max on the head, urging him to settle down. "He's just being protective," Mike whispered to Sarah as he climbed back into bed. The next night, the growling returned, this time louder and more urgent. Sarah and Mike exchanged concerned glances as Max paced near Tommy's door, his ears perked and tail stiff. Mike tried to lead him away, but Max resisted, standing his ground as though guarding something unseen. Tommy stirred in his bed, murmuring softly in his sleep, unaware of the commotion outside his room. Sarah, uneasy now, decided to sit with Max until he calmed down. She stroked his fur and whispered soothingly, but his body remained tense, his gaze locked on the same spot. By the third night, the growling had become impossible to ignore. Max's behavior was growing increasingly strange. He wasn't just growling anymore, he was whining, pacing, and occasionally scratching at Tommy's bedroom door. Sarah and Mike, still unsure of what was causing it, began to worry that something might actually be wrong. They considered the possibilities. Was Max sensing something outside the house? Was he sick? Or could it be something more serious? They couldn't shake the unease creeping into their minds as the once peaceful nights became filled with tension. Despite their growing concern, they tried to rationalize Max's actions. "Maybe he's just anxious," Mike suggested, though even he didn't sound convinced. Sarah nodded, but she couldn't ignore the pit in her stomach. Max had always been calm, even in stressful situations, and this behavior was completely out of character. As the clock ticked past midnight, Max let out a sharp bark that startled them both. Tommy remained asleep, but Sarah and Mike knew they couldn't keep dismissing this. Something was wrong, and they needed to find out what it was. During the day, everything seemed perfectly normal. Max was his usual playful self, chasing after Tommy in the yard, wagging his tail as they played catch, and lying contentedly by Sarah's feet in the kitchen. It was hard to imagine that the same dog who radiated warmth and calm during daylight hours would transform into an entirely different creature once night fell. Sarah and Mike watched him closely, but found no signs of distress or unusual behavior. It was as though the strange events of the night simply didn't exist in the light of day. But as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, Max's behavior shifted again. The growling returned, low and guttural, as he positioned himself outside Tommy's bedroom. It wasn't just the growling that unsettled Sarah and Mike, it was the way Max seemed completely transfixed, his eyes locked on the door as if he were guarding against some invisible threat. Tommy, meanwhile, began to show signs of restlessness. He would wake up crying in the middle of the night, claiming to have had nightmares. When Sarah asked him what the nightmares were about, he couldn't seem to explain, only saying that he felt like something was watching him. The unease in the house grew with each passing night. Max's behavior intensified. He began pacing in the hallway, scratching at Tommy's bedroom door, and occasionally letting out sharp barks that echoed through the otherwise silent home. Mike started to notice that Max's attention was always drawn to the same spot, the far corner of Tommy's room, near the closet. The couple tried to reassure themselves that it was just a coincidence, but the more they observed, the more unsettling it became. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Tommy started to seem tired and distracted during the day. His usual energy noticeably dimmed. When she asked him if he was feeling okay, he shrugged and said he was just having trouble sleeping. That night, as Sarah tucked him in, she sat with him for a while, watching as he drifted off to sleep. Max lay by the door, his ears twitching, his gaze locked on the same corner of the room. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine but pushed the thought aside, telling herself it was all in her head. But deep down, neither she nor Mike could deny that something strange was happening. Max's instincts had never steered them wrong before. They knew they had to figure out what was causing their once peaceful nights to turn into a source of constant tension and fear. They decided it was time to take action and uncover the truth behind Max's alarming behavior. Sarah and Mike couldn't ignore the growing tension in their home. Max's behavior had become too consistent and too focused to dismiss as random. Determined to find answers, they decided to set up a baby monitor in Tommy's room. Mike positioned the camera to cover the entire space, ensuring a clear view of the bed, the closet, and the corner that Max seemed so fixated on. That night, as they tucked Tommy in, Sarah reassured him that everything was fine, though she couldn't shake the unease that clung to her. As the family went to bed, Max assumed his usual position outside Tommy's door. The growling began shortly after midnight, low and steady at first, then gradually escalating. Sarah and Mike lay awake in their room, listening and feeling the weight of their anxiety grow. In the morning, after Tommy left for school, they retrieved the footage from the baby monitor, eager to find some explanation for Max's behavior. At first, everything on the recording seemed normal. Tommy fell asleep quickly, his breathing slow and steady. For the first hour or so, the room was completely still. Then, just after midnight, Max's growling began outside the door. On the screen, Tommy stirred slightly, shifting in his sleep. As they fast-forwarded through the footage, their eyes were drawn to a subtle movement. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, but as they rewound and played it again, the movement became clear. The closet door shifted, just slightly, as though it had been nudged from the inside. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as they watched Max's growling intensify on the audio. A few minutes later, a shadow appeared in the corner of the room, indistinct but unmistakable. It seemed to hover near Tommy's bed for a moment before disappearing into the darkness. Mike paused the video and exchanged a nervous glance with Sarah. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. They replayed the footage several times, each viewing only heightening their fear. Whatever was in Tommy's room wasn't easily explained. Sarah clutched Mike's arm, her mind racing with possibilities, but none of them offered comfort. That evening, as they prepared for another night, Sarah and Mike decided they couldn't wait any longer. They had to investigate the source of the disturbance. With flashlights in hand, they searched Tommy's room thoroughly, their hearts pounding with every step. When they reached the closet, Sarah hesitated. "It's just a closet," she muttered, trying to convince herself. But when Mike opened the door, what they found would lead them to a discovery far more horrifying than they could have ever imagined. As Mike swung open the closet door, the air inside felt unnaturally cold. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary space filled with Tommy's clothes, toys, and a few boxes. But Max's reaction was immediate. He barked furiously, his hackles raised, as if warning them to stay back. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the flashlight tightly, her heart racing. "There's nothing here," Mike said, though his voice was unsteady. But as he reached to push aside a row of hanging clothes, something caught his eye. Behind the clothes, partially hidden, was a small square panel in the wall. It was slightly ajar, as though it had been opened recently. Mike and Sarah exchanged a terrified glance before Mike carefully pulled the panel open, revealing a narrow, dark crawl space. The smell of stale air hit them immediately, and Sarah instinctively stepped back. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Mike aimed his flashlight into the opening, the beam illuminating a tight, dusty passageway. At first, it appeared empty, but as the light moved further in, they saw items scattered on the ground, empty food wrappers, a small blanket, and what looked like a notebook. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Someone's been in here," she whispered. The realization hit them both at once. An intruder had been living in their home, likely sneaking in and out through the crawl space. The thought sent chills down their spines. Mike carefully reached in and retrieved the notebook, flipping through its pages. Inside were scribbled notes, crude drawings, and phrases that made no sense, ramblings of someone disturbed. But what unsettled them the most were the sketches of a child's room, unmistakably Tommy's, complete with the bed, closet, and even the toys on the shelves. Sarah felt sick. "This is why Max was growling," she said, her voice barely audible. "He knew someone was in there." Mike nodded grimly, his jaw clenched. They immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes to search the crawl space and the surrounding area. The officers confirmed their worst fears. Someone had indeed been living there. They found additional belongings stashed deeper in the crawl space, including a makeshift pillow and what appeared to be a list of the family's daily routines. As the police worked, Sarah and Mike couldn't stop thinking about how close Tommy had been to danger every night. Max's instincts had likely saved him from harm, his growls and barks keeping the intruder at bay. The officers assured them the area was now secure, but the emotional toll was evident on Sarah and Mike's faces. They couldn't shake the horror of knowing a stranger had been so close to their son. That night, as they sat in the living room with Tommy, who was blissfully unaware of the true danger he'd been in, they looked at Max, their loyal protector. He lay at Tommy's feet, his tail wagging gently, as though the events of the past few nights hadn't taken a toll on him. But Sarah and Mike knew better. Max had saved their family, and they would forever be grateful for his unwavering loyalty and bravery. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah, Mike, and Tommy. The police investigation confirmed that the intruder had been living in the crawl space for weeks, possibly longer. They had entered and exited the home through a small vent in the back of the house, remaining undetected until Max's protective instincts alerted the family. The thought of someone watching their every move, lurking so close to Tommy, was almost too much to bear. Sarah and Mike made immediate changes to their home, sealing off the crawl space and installing new security measures, including cameras and motion detectors. But no amount of physical protection could erase the memory of what had happened. Tommy, still too young to fully understand, was told only that the police had taken care of everything. Sarah and Mike chose to leave out the horrifying details, shielding him from the fear they couldn't escape themselves. Despite the lingering unease, there was one constant that brought them comfort. Max. The loyal German shepherd had proven himself to be more than just a pet. He had sensed danger before anyone else, and his actions had likely saved Tommy from harm. Sarah often found herself sitting with Max, her hand running gently over his fur, whispering words of gratitude. "You're our hero, Max," she would say softly, her eyes filling with tears. Mike took extra care to include Max in everything, from their morning routines to family outings. Tommy, blissfully unaware of the full extent of Max's bravery, still called him his best friend and spent hours playing with him in the backyard. To the young boy, Max was simply the dog who loved him unconditionally, but to Sarah and Mike, he was the guardian angel who had kept their family safe. As the weeks passed, the family began to heal. The fear and anxiety started to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of gratitude for their bond and for Max's unwavering loyalty. In time, the house became a home again, filled with laughter and warmth. though now accompanied by a heightened sense of vigilance. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Tommy curled up on the couch with Max by his side. Sarah looked at Mike and smiled. "We'll never take him for granted again," she said quietly. Mike nodded in agreement, his hand resting on Max's head. The video concludes with a heartwarming shot of Tommy hugging Max tightly, the dog's tail wagging in pure contentment. A voiceover delivers the final message. Sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a guardian, and a reminder that love and loyalty can make all the difference. The family would never forget the terrifying experience they'd endured, but they would also never forget the courage of their loyal dog, who had stood guard when they needed him most. Max had been their silent protector, and for that, they would always be grateful.